working hard for a living isn't necessarily the cleverest way to get on in life. I turned it upside down and I created wealth from the start.
Chris Gray is host of Sky News show Your Property Empire. He's an entrepreneur and a property investor himself, having accumulated a portfolio valued at about 15 million. Primarily, Chris and I don't agree on a single thing. Good to have you, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Have I ever told you I think you're batshit crazy?
Yep, but the thing I find with skeptics is if you never take any action, you never get any results. So no matter what people think, then it's all in the result.
And for the last 10 years, 20 years, lifetimes, I don't know, property investing has been quite lucrative.
Sure, and so look, I'm typically looking 10, 20 or 30 years ahead, and sure there's some ups and downs, but the long trail is that the market's risen, both in the UK and in Australia, and most other places around the world, so it's you've got to be in it to win it.
Well, let me get this straight. So your general advice to people is to take on mortgages and pile mortgages on top of each other?
Effectively, yeah. So first of all, we don't use the word advise because then we can get sued on that. But apart from that, then the thought process is if you could buy your parents' property for whatever price they paid, how many would you buy? You'd buy hundreds of them. If you could buy your grandparents' property for the same price they paid, you'd have done the same. And so my philosophy is to accumulate as many assets as possible, whilst having enough cash that if there's a difference between the rent and the mortgage, you can still afford to pay the bills and you're not forced to sell. And just stay in the market as long as possible.
Is it sound to just assume forever growth?
No, there's no guarantee. But if you look at the market trend, it's like that with a couple of ripples. And so do you want to bet against that graph to say it's suddenly the world's going to come to an end? Or do you want to say, well, as long as you can hold on, sure, there's a few little dips and the rest of it, but generally it's risen. Now, there is places around the world that the market's halved. Yeah. But if you generally stick around major capital cities at the median price where there's height limits, so you can't build any more physical property, that's where all the local workers need to live and to work and they earn all the money. Most of those places haven't gone down. You get all these complicated things, all these intelligent people that come on my show, but it comes down to supply and demand. If there's no physical property around and lots of people want it, price goes up.
Walk me through your personal investment philosophy.
So really my philosophy is just accumulate and hold on for the long term. So I'm not wondering if property is going to rise in the next year or in the next 6 months. I'm thinking in 10 years' time, will it make more money? And as long as I can hold on in the meantime, then I think I'll profit. And it's literally as simple as that. So I started at 22, I was an accountant. I didn't know anything about property, I just understood numbers. And now I've done my 20,000 hours or 50,000 hours to be an expert, and I've interviewed probably 400, done 400 shows on TV interviewing experts, and not a lot's actually changed. Sure, I learned a lot more in the last 20 years, but it still comes down to the basics. So when I was 22, I wanted to buy my own home.
Yeah, let's go back there. You're 22.
Yeah.
How do you come to realize, let's start to invest in property?
So I was just brought up with the education from parents, you've got to buy your own home. Rent money's dead money, so buy your own home. I earned £10,000, and so typically you could afford 3 times your income, so a £30,000 place, which would be the crappiest place in town. But then I worked out I didn't want to live in that place because I came from a good background and I wanted a nice house
near
the
kid,
bars.
Yeah.
I wanted to be near the bars.
Of course.
And so I fell in love with a 3-bedroom house. And I worked the numbers out to say a 3-bedroom house was cheaper than a 1-bedroom unit, because if I rented 2 rooms out to 2 friends, that would pay most of the mortgage because the rents then were like 10 or 12%. And so this was the logic. A one-bedroom unit's expensive, 3-bedroom house is free. And so I ended up buying a £100,000 place for 80,000, so I did a good deal on it. And so I made 2 years' salary overnight and lived for free. And then 2 years later I worked out how to use the equity to get a free Porsche. So I couldn't afford a Porsche on a 3-year lease, but I could afford it on a 25-year mortgage. So I had free house, free Porsche, and if I sold it all and paid off the debt, I'd still make a profit. That's the genius I thought. Working hard for a living isn't necessarily the cleverest way to get on in life. If there's a will, there's a way. If you really want to do it, I've met people with no education, no job, they can still get into the market.
But that scares me even more. How is it a reasonable thing for someone to take on a mortgage without ever having the ability to pay it?
So look, it's got to be calculated. So in my case, then having those two tenants that could pay the mortgage then made the difference. But if you think about entrepreneurs, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. So my dad was a doctor, I was an accountant, it was job for life. I couldn't understand entrepreneurs. How could you run a business not knowing money coming in and out? So I think the property investing stuff is easy and a no-brainer because I've got a job, whereas I couldn't understand people like you that would be in your own business from a young age. Yeah. But I thought it's a reasonable bet because I've got a regular income. Whereas I guess entrepreneurs, they wouldn't invest in property because they haven't got the regular income, but they're completely happy taking on hiring lots of people and having an office and expenses, not knowing if you've got revenue coming in. And so this is why I think even entrepreneurs need to get into property, because as an entrepreneur, you're betting red or black. Either you're going to make a fortune from your company or you're going to make nothing. And my thought is to take money off the table during your journey, to put it into something safe and solid like bricks and mortar or property, because then if the business doesn't work out, then at least you've got something as a backup. I think you need to try and do both of those things in parallel, because so most people go to school, get the education, they invest in their careers, whether it's in a corporate or as an entrepreneur, and they're betting their whole life on it. And if they create some money, then they'll try and turn it into wealth later on. What I did is I turned it upside down, I created wealth from the start. And so I concentrated on building my asset base, not building my career. So my career was a secondary thing. And if I had time to have a career and work and be
So
good
be
at
it.
that, then so be it.
And while you build a property portfolio of, currently about 15 million, you lease your own home.
Yeah,
Talk to me about that.
yeah. So have you ever played Monopoly?
I have.
Yeah. So I'm buying all those little green houses.
I always cry everything's overpriced.
So I buy all those little green houses where they're average price properties, they're easy for you to buy when you land on them, they're easy to rent out. I then go and rent the hotel on Mayfair or Park Lane, because in, say, normal language, say in Sydney, say a $5 or $10 million home, not many people can afford the rent on it. The people that can afford the rent on it don't want to rent it because poor people rent. And so the price goes down. Whereas the price on my $1 million Bondi or Coogee units goes up because there's lots of young renters that can't afford to get in the market, so the price goes up. So I roughly get 4 to 5% yield on mine, and I pay 1 or 2% yield on the expensive ones. So effectively the mathematics is, whatever I can afford to buy, I can rent somewhere 3 times more expensive for the same money. So if you wanted to live in, say, if you could afford, say, 2 or 3 million, that will get you an okay home in Sydney, nothing major. But I'd rather have 3 $1 million units, and I could use that rent to then have a $6 or $7 million home.
What makes you emotional?
Nothing. So I'm an accountant, so one of the great advantages of being an accountant is I've got no emotion. So whether I'm investing $1 million or 10 or 20 million, I've got no emotion, so I'm just looking at the numbers. So where the average person is worried about the market or worried about what people say, I don't, because I've got an Excel spreadsheet.
Looking at that Excel file of yours,
Yeah.
what could cause it to collapse?
So bottom line is property crashing, interest rates going through the roof, rents really dropping down. They're the main factors of things. Because the banks have lent so much money on property, both the banks and the government need the market to be stable. They can't have it going up and down, it causes chaos, whatever.
But that's coming back to this assumption of a stable market, because old structures need it to.
If the average person has got it as their home, that is the one thing they hold on to. So they can lose the car, they can lose their holiday home, they can lose their jobs, they can not go on holiday, they can almost not feed the kids, but they'll keep the roof over their head. So it's the last thing that they want to do, and it's the last thing that the banks want to do is to repossess, because then it hits the papers and it's all bad. So everyone's got a vested interest in that homeowner still owning that home and not being kicked out.
So how does this all come together in a business plan for yourself? Like when you start to build your own business, how does this come into play?
So really what I've done is over the last 20 years I've just accumulated property. And I just thought, even if I was 100% geared, so say I got to 10 million of assets, 10 million of debt, and then just stopped. As the market rises by 10%, effectively my gearing goes from 100% to 90 to 80. So suddenly within 3 or 4 years of an upswing, you could go from being 100% geared down to 50 or 60. And at 50 or 60% gearing, it's cash neutral. And you're pretty much home free. So that's been my business plan, is whatever I earned from wages or from a business, or I didn't worry about saving. It was purely about getting my asset base up to effectively 10 million plus, and then stopping. And then just being able to hold on for that one more property cycle or half a cycle, and then pretty much it's game over, which is almost where I am now.
And what does game over mean?
So game over means having enough cash that you can afford the difference between the rent and the mortgage. You can afford to pay all your bills and all your outgoings for maybe 5 or 10 years.
Are you invested in anything but property?
No, the other thing is cars. I've got
That's a bad investment.
It's a great investment. So that's the thing, is everyone thinks it's a bad investment.
Don't tell me you credit card a car.
I make money from it.
Oh, here we go.
So here's the next one. And my wife hates these stories because
I already hate it.
She knows the mathematics work and she can't argue against it, but it works. So I say a Lamborghini is cheaper than a BMW. So a lot of real estate agents, they go and buy a 250 grand BMW or Mercedes. Straight away it loses value. Within 3 years it'll be worth 100, 150. So it costs them 30 to 50 grand a year. So I bought a 750 grand Lamborghini, but I bought it 8 years old, so it cost me 250, same price as the BMW. But rather than depreciate, mine's actually started to appreciate now. So 3 years on, rather than going from 250 down to 100 or 150, it's now up at 350. So I'm roughly making 30 or 40 grand a year from the car. It might cost me 10 or 20 grand to run it and repairs and maintenance and all that kind of stuff, but effectively it's profiting. So in 3 years I've made 100 grand, and some argument is I should have bought 3 Lamborghinis in 3 colours and I'd have made 300 grand. So it's about making work fun.
Oh, getting sweaty. I'm getting nervous. So paint me a picture of one particular time where you were really struggling and how you got out of it.
Sure. So I've probably had it 2 or 3 times that I've literally got down to my last $10. So interest rates have been rising. I've been paying, say, 8, 9, 10, 11% interest rates. The property market hasn't been rising. I'm negative cash flow 200,000 or 300,000 a year. So you get up on the 1st of January, you've already spent 300 grand for the year. And so times are really tough. But that's the time that I get off my backside and I start making a few phone calls. I ring some clients, I try and do some business. And so this is the way I've seen how I motivate myself. So I'm actually naturally lazy, which people don't believe because I'm obviously reasonably successful. But I suddenly have money in the bank and I can't sleep. If there's money in the bank, it scares me. I'm not doing enough with it. So I then go and invest, but I over-invest. And rather than buy 2 million, I buy 3 million, which I can't afford. So suddenly I've got no money. And then I've got to work. So I start ringing clients, hey, do you want to do some business? And then I get the business rolling, I create some money again, so I feel comfortable. And then I'm scared because I've got money again. So I go and invest. So whereas most people won't invest, I over-invest.
Why does a pile of cash make you nervous?
Because I just think I'm not doing enough with it. So say if I had $1 million in cash now, and I think the property market's rising, well, if I bought $1 million worth of property, or I could leverage that to buy 5 million of property, and if that was going up at 10% a year, I'm making 500 grand a year.
What does risk do to you?
It makes you lose your hair. So, to me, it's a bit of an adrenaline type thing. But I think the difference is there's difference between calculated and uncalculated risk. So I know my numbers. I talk to a lot of people. So a lot of people say, why do you share all your numbers in the press? I tell people what I earn, how much assets I've got, how much debt I've got. And it's not to boast or to say, look, I've only got this. It's more than people question what I do. Just like you question, why would you keep getting a mortgage, or all these experts? But for years, I get all these people questioning me. And once I'm not getting any new questions and I can answer those questions and they're not saying, I know, but what about this, what about that? I'm 95% certain on my strategy because I've had thousands of people question it. Whereas if you keep all your stuff to yourself and no one questions it, how do you know you're doing the right thing?
Cool, man. Not buying right now, but thanks so much for being here.
One day.